Hello guys, I hope you are all doing well. This video is not going to be in Afrikaans and it's not going to be about ghosts for a change. I've decided to do a short, well, not going to be so short, video about SpaceX or the Starship in general, just the space race, just to keep myself occupied and not too bored. Yeah, so this video is not going to focus on ghosts, so if you are only tuned in to watch ghosts, I'm really sorry about this, but I'm not going to create a new channel just for this. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this little distraction from lockdowns and reality. Yeah, it's borders on, for some of you this will border on science fiction, but to me it's quite real. Ja, en I enjoy it, so I hope you enjoy it as well. So luister bietjie na my as ek bietjie kak praat, of nie noodwendig kak nie, maar ja, bietjie entertainment net vir geen whatsoever rede. So enjoy, this video is going to be in English like I said, and let's get started. Initially, the aim behind this video was to explain to you how important the work that SpaceX is doing is. Many people just rub it off as, yeah, that rich guy is just doing stuff and it's not going to impact humanity. We seem to forget where most of the stuff, well, not potentially most, but a lot of the stuff that we use on a daily basis, where it comes from. Can you imagine going to a place and having to pull out a map to be able to get there, or stopping for directions every 5 seconds? Sorry, that's from my balls are trying to chip in. Yeah, you would not be able to use GPS because it wouldn't exist. You would not be able to use a laptop because it wouldn't exist, and as a result most likely iPads and smartphones as well. There's many things that we take for granted and we don't realize where it comes from. If there was no space race, if there was no Cold War, in fact if there was no Second World War, we would most likely not be able to have half of the stuff we do today. So all of the tragic events that led to our current time contributed to us having all the technology that we have today, or most of it at least. Most likely you would not be able to send an email. There's so many things that can be added to this list, but I'm not going to add all of them because then we're going to sit here for the whole day. One of the things that people don't seem to realize, and yeah, let's add that as well. Rockets. People don't seem to understand how it works, or many people, most people certainly, don't seem to understand to now how it works and why it works the way it does. A lot of it I didn't understand until I went and actually read up on it. It's not that obvious to the everyday man on the street, I include myself there, why rockets work the way they do. I remember watching the old videos of the Apollo missions. Now, the Cold War started as a result of the Second World War, and as a result of that, the space race got started and all this technology was born. And the reason for this technology is initially for weapons and ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which carries nuclear warheads, or potentially does. So we don't seem to understand how stuff works and how the space race came to be what it is and why we have the technology we do. We take it for granted. We just use them every day and we never think about it for a second. All the suffering and pain that the human race went through from the start up until now, I believe it happens for a reason. We might not like it, but it happened and we deal with it. The fact is that the technology we have today, we have many things and many people to thank for it. Technology can be used for good or bad. It's not an entity. It's something created by man. So now let's explain how a rocket works. The conventional rockets that was used to get us to the moon, like the Apollo missions, I think it was a Saturn V, but in any case, the rocket concept works in stages, and I never actually understood why a rocket works in stages. Why don't we just build a big spaceship and fly it up and be there and do whatever we want to do up there? But the thing is, to reach a terminal velocity at which you can escape the gravity of Earth and get into an orbit and get up to the speed that you need to be in orbit, to stay in orbit, you need rockets that are multi-stage rockets. To explain this to you, a rocket, obviously, it's about your weight ratio. You have a rocket composed of various stages, like you can see hopefully behind me, if I can still get that clip up. To decrease the weight to power ratio, to even it out, to balance it out, for the rockets to be able to accelerate to the speeds necessary to get into orbit, you need to ditch some of that extra weight as the rocket uses up the fuel. The weight obviously increases compared to the power it puts out. So the second stages of this rocket needs to shed the weight. So it sheds the first stage and continues with less weight and the other rocket engines on the second stage. That's the way it operates, and that's the way it gets into space, and that's why we have multi-stage rockets. It's oversimplifying it, I know. It's lots more complicated than that. But because of stuff like the arms race and the space race, well, the arms race that preceded the space race, we have multi-stage rockets. These rockets were initially designed by a German scientist that the Americans got from Germany during or after the Second World War. Very few people know this. So we've got the Germans and the Second World War to thank for the American success in the space race, and the same with the Russians. In fact, they used a lot of German scientists to get them to space, and in fact the Russians got to orbit faster, I think in 1959 or close to about there, and the Americans got to the moon first though in 1969, if I'm not mistaken, with the Apollo 11 mission. Yeah, the thing is just, most people don't understand why we have multi-stage rockets. And now the thing with multi-stage rockets is that it creates a lot of space junk, and not just multi-stage rockets, satellites that are not in operation anymore, space junk, debris from previous rockets and spacecraft still float around in space, and sometimes for many, many years. Not all of them fall down to Earth and burn up in the atmosphere. And the thing why it's important for SpaceX to succeed, it's not just the evolution of technology that's influenced by this. And why SpaceX comes in here and are important is the fact that they are designing reusable rockets, not multi-stage rockets. Yes, multi-stage rockets, but they are reusable. The super heavy that they are currently designing are being tested, and the Starship project is in the full swing in terms of development. The first orbital flight is planned for July, but that's not going to happen. It will probably be early in next year or later in this year. We'll have to wait and see. But as soon as this rocket is actually up and running, like, you know, if you watch follow the SpaceX news, you will know that the rocket program has been developing at a steady pace, and no other company is coming close. There's a few others that's got similar ideas and is developing their own systems and rockets, some of them similar. But the Starship project is the most ambitious rocket program since Apollo 11, in my opinion, and it will change the world. Just like the Starlink project that's being launched with partial reusable rockets, the Falcon 9 or Heavy. So that is already changing the price tag that goes with getting to space and making space a bit more accessible. And even the US military is using Starlink, or not Starlink, well, they might use Starlink in future, I don't know. But they are definitely using the SpaceX rockets to get their equipment and their satellites in space. The thing with the Starship project, or the Starship program, is that it's going to change the world. like no other spacecraft has done before. It's not just about getting to Mars. It's the main objective of the CEO or the founder of SpaceX, Elon Musk. But it's not this. It's not gonna the implications of this journey to developing this spacecraft or the Starship is unbelievable. There will be so many advancements to our society, and people that tend to say, okay, but this is just going to create a bunch of space junk and it's not good for the environment, obviously didn't take a look at the history of space travel and how it evolved, and don't really understand how reusable rockets will change the world. There will be no space junk if this succeeds, or very little, but as far as I know, none. And the applications of a Starship is unbelievable. It will not just be used to travel to Mars. Like I said, NASA is interested in its moon missions in future, or is interested in using the Starship for its future moon missions, or to some degree or the other. And Starship is developing, well, SpaceX is developing a lunar Starship as well. The thing is with the Starship project that this will not just be used for space travel. You could potentially travel from one side to the Earth or even around the Earth in about an hour's time or even less to different continents. And this could be used for commercial purposes. And if you are adventurous enough, you would be able to take a Starship from Australia to America and potentially fly from Los Angeles to Sydney in half an hour or so, which would be a major accomplishment. And this could transport maybe even 200 people from one continent to another in half an hour, which sounds unbelievable, but it's more than possible. There was even in the past secret projects in the American government or American military. They called Icarus. They changed the name later on, but the idea behind Icarus was to create a spaceship that could launch over 1,000 troops and equipment to any part of the world within half an hour or an hour. And this was really a thing. They were developing the ship, but it never came to fruition. So it was never fully developed and it never saw the light of day. But the idea was there and it was in development, but it never completed. So Starship kind of reminds me of this project, Icarus, that was part of the US Defense plans back in the day. I think it was probably about the 60s, around about the 60s, around about there. But the implications of this, and I predict that there will be a military Starship in future to enable the US military and potentially others in the future to distribute the equipment or supplies or even troops across the world in next to no time. And that would be a complete and total game changer for any military. That will basically mean that overseas bases might not be necessary for big, powerful countries or economies. Even companies will make use of Starship. Even think about this, there's not just military and commercial applications. If there's relief needed in a disaster-ridden area, you could transport hundreds or potentially more tons to that area within half an hour or an hour, anywhere in the world, from anywhere. And that the implications in that is tremendous. And this technology will in the future change the world, with or without Elon Musk. The end goal for Elon Musk is obviously to colonize Mars and make our species multiplanetary. And that might sound ridiculous to those of you that don't follow space news and space development progress, but that's the end goal, and it's becoming more and more possible. After all, the first Starship landed, the first successful landing of a Starship took place already. And keep in mind, let me just explain to you how a Starship works. You get a Starship on its own, which is in fact like the second stage. The first stage will comprise of the Super Heavy, the booster, which contains 28 to 30, I think, I'm speaking under correction, engines, Raptor engines. And that's the section that comes at the bottom, the tall section at the bottom, and a Starship is the section that is actually stacked on top of the Super Heavy. And all the construction for this project has already been going on for a while and is nearing completion. There's many channels that cover this, and I would suggest that you take a look at them. If you see the development taking place, I think you will take this operation a bit more serious, because it's growing in leaps and bounds, and there's many people backing this. I, for one, think it's a good thing, and I can't wait for this development to take off and the space race or space to be more accessible, if you can put it like that. The Starlink project is another thing. Unfortunately, in my country, Starlink is not allowed or won't be allowed for the foreseeable future. I was looking forward to maybe one day having a Starlink connection, but unfortunately, my government decided that SpaceX is not black owned and it will not be allowed here. So unfortunately, I'm not going to raise my opinions about that. I've got very strong opinions in that regard, and I think some laws are just going to hold us back and stop evolution of technology and of the human species. Starlink is aimed at providing low-cost, high-speed internet across the globe, wherever you are. Because if you think about it, there's no fiber connections in third world countries and many parts of my country even, which is South Africa for the record, that there's no internet of high quality and high speed that's available freely across rural areas and everywhere. If you have a Starlink connection, you connect via satellite and you can use a solar dish to power your array or dish to pick up the satellites. So it's literally limitless in terms of where you can pick up this connection. There's already, I think it's 1,700 satellites in orbit for Starlink, and that number is going to grow. I think it's been approved for up to 10,000 satellites, but the end goal is to have, I think, 30,000 satellites. And I know for you green people, no offense meant by that, we are all entitled to our opinions. You are or might be concerned about the clutter and debris this might cause in space, and some astronomers have raised concerns about this as well, because then they can't see all the stars that they want to see, because satellites create glare. The light bounces off them and it makes it less visible, the night sky, if you want to put it like that. Excuse my terminology. I'm no expert in terms of the terms, and I'm trying my best to get there, but I think I've got a good grasp on it. But yeah, Starlink is something that will change potentially the world, and I've got a suspicion this will tie into Tesla. If you follow Tesla, you will know that the end goal of Tesla is not just providing electric cars, green energy, which is not necessarily always green. It costs resources to create batteries and the products used, but I think it's a good idea, and it's a better alternative than our petrol and diesel driven cars that we have, most of us at least. But the main idea behind Starlink, I suspect, not the main idea, but one of the big opportunities for Starlink and Tesla is getting their cars driverless. And this might seem fanciful or futuristic to some people, but if you have been following these already driverless cars, most of them are like in a trial period or something, if I'm not mistaken. I'm speaking under correction here, please note that. But there's already driverless cars, and if you have a worldwide internet connection like Starlink, you can operate such a system with driverless cars much more easily with a Starlink connection, internet connection driven by satellites worldwide that can cover the whole globe, and which is another good idea. And there's a lot of Elon Musk driven owned companies that link in together. Not everyone seems to notice this, but if you pay close attention, you'll notice that most of these companies are aimed at creating revenue and getting SpaceX to Mars and the human race to Mars. It's not coincidence that they operate the way they do. All of these technologies can contribute to financing, especially Starlink, financing the Mars missions, and also creating infrastructure on Mars that can be used by SpaceX and the colonists that one day might set foot on Mars. But it all ties in together. So there's many applications to the Starship program and the Starlink program and even Tesla, like I explained just now. But all of these things seem to tie in together. Let's just hope that bureaucracy and politics don't get in the way, and we can advance as a species, and think of all the developments in the past that contributed to us having the technology that we have today. All of the things contributed. Some of the bad things influenced people to develop things. Well, some bad people actually develop stuff that we use today on a regular basis. We just don't admit it or look at it in such a way. But there's no limit to human ingenuity. Whether or not you like someone, it doesn't mean you're not going to use something they invented. Me personally, I love the work Elon Musk is doing, and I admire it. Look, if a government shuts down or federal bureaucracy shuts down something, that company or that entity will go somewhere else to get investment or approval from their territory. So if you think about it, there's not just launch platforms in Texas, Boca Chica. SpaceX is developing sea launch platforms, which might be completed within a year from now, the first one. Which would mean less bureaucracy that's involved and less approvals possibly needed. I'm not sure about the legislation approvals and how it works, but I'm sure it will be much easier from a sea launch platform, especially in terms of environmental groups. I know there's been some issues with turtles, endangered turtles near Boca Chica that environmental groups are concerned about the impact of launches from this SpaceX industry or the Starship project. But if you think about it, the funny thing is, just for me, Cape Canaveral is actually, if I'm not mistaken, in a conservation area, and I'm sure but there was potential issues there as well, but no one said a word in that regard, and the space race continued without being hindered by environmental groups. And I just think I find it suspicious that suddenly there's issues regarding this. If there is a long-term or big influence on the environment, yes, investigators try to assist or accommodate all parties involved. Sometimes it's not easy, but maybe it needs to be done. And well, the complex at Boca Chica is growing at an immense rate, and I think approval should not have been granted for this if this were to be a problem. The agencies involved in approving the development of Boca Chica, or the star base as it's been called, should have looked at this prior to giving approval. It's already been approved, and I think we should not let differences or issues like this stop us from developing as a species. Because it's advantageous for the whole world if we advance our technology and our capabilities. Many things that we use today to protect the environment is thanks to development, thanks to advancement of the human race and the human species. And it's important for us to take note of that, especially if we are an environmental group. We need to think about the broader picture and how this impacts not just humanity but the whole entire planet. There will be this space junk, like I said, for one, and the technology that will get us to Mars will end up changing the world as a whole. And that's not just speculation, that's a fact. If you look at the Apollo missions and the entire space race, there's many things that change the world for good. In fact, probably more good than bad. But in any case, just my short explanation on the current space race, which is actually one-sided in terms of big rockets being designed. Although there is some other companies, I know one is based in California that's also designing a big rocket, but it's going to take a few years for them. They're many years behind SpaceX. And then there's a few others like Rocket Lab, which is based in New Zealand as far as I know, that's creating quite a splash in terms of launching small satellites, and the rockets are of quite a good standard and being used by various agencies across the world, if I'm not mistaken. But it's good to keep an eye out on Rocket Lab as well. Not a fan personally of Jeff Bezos' operation. I think it's Blue Origin. I've got my suspicions about them, but I'll keep them to myself. But I'm a big and huge SpaceX fan, and can't wait for them to develop more technology and prove the naysayers wrong and lift us up into the stars at a reasonable and acceptable rate and develop us as a species. I think it's very important. There's many things that Elon Musk said in terms of the human race that makes sense. And remember, no one can tell you what to say, but you have a decision on listening to someone and making up your own mind about what they said. So keep on being free, keep on thinking, keep on developing, and might see you again next time. Cheers.